Weisathier Hale. Today, I thought it would be a good idea to read an excerpt from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. If you've taken one of my classes, you'll know that this is a passage that I really like to kind of teach to people who have a bit of a grasp on Old English and are ready to read like a real passage. It's generally recommended for beginners, and it's really well read in general because of the material. It has a very tragic, kind of dramatic story that's extremely Germanic in its kind of soul, in that you have these parties that have certain loyalties, and because of maybe one bad apple or maybe one evil deed, now these virtuous characters are kind of driven to ruin because of their adherence to their loyalties. And this is something that you see all throughout Old Norse, Old High German, Old English, a really, really common Germanic poetic artistic theme. And this is an excellent beginner friendly example of it. So I'm going to go through this passage. I'm going to read the sentences in Old English, and then I'll give modern English where appropriate. If at any point you kind of think you missed something, or if you would like to read this in a more zoomed in way, this link, this website is obviously free, available to everyone. This link is available I'll put it in the comments. And the nice thing about it is that you can click on words whenever you want. Let's say I don't know what benom means. Okay, this is beniman, and it's the past. It means deprived. It means took. Alternatively, if you want to look in like a dictionary, I recommend Wiktionary. I'll put both of these links in the comments. And then, of course, you can always go back, watch something again, as many times as it takes for you to feel confident. Once I read through this, I would recommend going back and reading it by yourself and seeing how much you can understand. Okay. Herr Cynewulf benam Siebricht his riches, and Wessex na Witan for unrichtum darum, Bhutan Hamtunshire, and he had a tha, oth he of sloch van alderman, the him lengest wunde. Herr Cynewulf benam Siebricht his riches. Here Cynewulf took Siebricht's kingdom away from him. He deprived him of his kingdom. Herr Cynewulf benam Siebricht his riches. And West Saxon Witan, and the wise men of the West Saxon. So both Cynewulf and the West Saxon Witan benam Siebricht his riches. For what? For wham? For hui? For unrichtum darum. For kind of crimes, unright deeds. Herr Cynewulf benam Siebricht his riches, and West Saxon Witan, for hui? For unrichtum darum. Bhutan Hamptonshire, except for Hamptonshire. That is Hampshire. Bhutan Hamptonshire. And he havde tha, that is, Cynewulf havde Hamptonshire, oath until, oath he of sloch thonne alderman, the him lengest wunde, that is, the mid him lengest wunde. That is, Cynewulf of sloch thonne alderman, the mid him lengest wunde. He havde tha, he havde Hamptonshire, oath he of sloch van alderman to him and just one day. He had Hampshire until he killed the alderman, until he killed, that's kind of like an officer of some sort. And oath until oath he of sloch van alderman, they made him lengest one day, that lived with him, that is the Hampshire residents, lengest one day, for the longest time lived. So this means essentially, Siebricht had Hampshire until he killed one of the nobles there that was there for a long time. Cynewulf benam Siebricht his riches, and West Saxon Witan for unrichtum darum, Bhutan Hamptonshire, and he, that is Siebricht, havde tha, oath he of sloch thonne alderman, the him lengest wunde. And hinne tha Cynewulf on Andrad a dravde, then Cynewulf drove him into Andrad. And hinne tha Cynewulf on Andrad a dravde, and he, Siebricht, thar wunde, he lived there, and he thar wunde, oath that hinne an swan of stong at Privitsfloran. Oath that hinne an swan of stong, until swineherd of stong hinne killed him. All that hine an swan of stong at privitis flodan, at Peter's flood. Und he rak thona alderman cumbran. Und we witon that cumbra is senoma thas aldermannes the Siebricht of Sloch. That is, we know Cumbra is the name of the alderman that Siebricht killed. So Siebricht thar wunere on Andrade, all that hina an swan of stong at privitus flodan, and he rack, and he avenged, and he rack van alderman Cumbran. On se Cynewulf oft Mitchlum Gefeuchtem fought with Breitwalem, and Cynewulf, often with many great battles, fought with the Welsh, with Breitwalem. On se Cynewulf oft mit Mitchlum Gefeuchtem fought with Breitwalem, and anon 30 wintra faste he riche habde, so when he had his kingdom for 31 years, anon 30 wintra faste he riche habde, he wilde a dravan anne athling se was Cyneheard haten. He wanted to banish a nobleman that was named Cyneheard. He wilde a dravan anne athling se was Cyneheard haten, and se Cyneheard was thas Siebrichtes broder. Cyneheard was Siebricht's brother. Se Cyneheard was thas Siebrichtes broder. That is, anon 30 wintra, das the he riche havde, he wilde a dravan expel, a dravan anne atheling, se was Cyneheard haten, on se Cyneheard was das Siebrichtes broder. So, we can understand why this guy would want to exile Siebricht's brother. He was probably causing some sort of stir because he was trying to avenge his deposed older brother. On tha je askode he, van a kuning ludle werde on wiefkichte on merantune, on hine tharbe rad on van a boer utan beeude hine tha men on funden, de mid tham kuninge waren. On tha je askode he, and then he found out, on tha je askode he van a kuning, that the king, je askode he van a kuning ludle werde on wiefkichte on merantune. And here we can supply like a was. So he found out that the king was with a ludle werde, with a small troop of men. Thaya askade heith on a kuning ludle werde on wiefkiethe, which means like a journey to see his wife, or maybe a mistress, we don't really know. On wiefkiethe on Merantune in Merton. Ja askade Cyneheard. So Cyneheard found out that the king was with a small troop in Merton to see his wife. Thá je askade he van a kuning ludle werde on wiefkiethe on Merantune, and hine tharbe rad, then he rode himself, hine tharbe rad, and thona boer, he rode himself there, and hine tharbe rad, and thona boer utan beeude, hine tha men on funden, the mid tham kuninge waren. So he, thona boer, the room, that is the room that the king and presumably also his wife are in. Thona boer, utan beeude, surrounded. Utan beeude, hine tha men on funden, before the men found him. Hine tha men on funden, the mid tham kuninge waren, that were with the king. On tha on yat se kuning that, and then the king realized that. On tha on yat se kuning that, on he on tha duru eude, and he went to the door. So just to pause real quick, what we have here, Cyneheard, presumably with a band of soldiers, has gone to where the king is, and before he was found by the king's guards, he managed to surround the room that the king was in with his wife. On tha on yat se kuning that, and when the king found that out, on tha on yat se kuning that, not when, then. On tha on yat, and then he discovered. On he on tha duru eude, and he went to the doors. On he on tha duru eude, on tha unha niche hine werde, oth he on thona atheling lokode. Tha unhanliche hinewerde. He defended himself nobly. Unhanliche literally means not ignobly, not depraved. Unhanliche. Hinewerde, he defended himself. Hinewerde, oath he on thona adeling locode, until he saw the nobleman. Oath he on thona adeling locode, that is, Cyneheard. He yesach Cyneheard. He locode on Cyneheard. On Cyneheard. On tha ut rasde on hine, and then he rushed out at him. On tha ut rasde on hine mittlum gewundere, and he severely wounded him. On hine mittlum gewundere. Good. On tha on jatse kinning fat, on he on duru eode, on tha unhanliche hine werde, oath he on thona adeling locode, on tha ut rasde on hine mittlum gewundere. Miklum. I think that's actually Miklum. Und hine Miklum gewundere. Und he alle on thana kunning waren feuchtende, o that he hine of slayene have done. He alle on thana kunning waren feuchtende. They were all fighting the king. That is, if you can picture the king is by himself, he's just rushed out, he's severely wounded Cyneheard, and then all of Cyneheard's men are surrounding him, he's fighting against them by himself. He alle on thona kunning waren feuchtende, oath that he hine of slayene have done, until they had slain him. Oath that he hine of slayene have done. Und tha on thas weavis yebarum, and then in that woman's room, on tha on thas weavis yebarum on fundon thas kunninges theinas, tha unstilnisse. So then, in his wife's room, the king's thanes, das Königes Thainas, the king's thanes, on fundon, found, tha unstilnesse, the kind of unsightliness, the evil scene. That is, there's probably a lot of blood, the woman's probably screaming, the door's probably been knocked down, and there's a lot of enemy soldiers about, and the king is dead. On thas weavis yebarum on fundun das Königes Thainas, tha unstilnesse, on tha thider urnon swa welch swa thon jarwart on radost. On tha thider urnon, and then they ran there, swa welch swa thon jarwart on radost. Swa welch swa means kind of like whoever, thon jarwart, whoever then was ready, on radost, and quickest. On tha thider urnun swa welch swa thon jarwart on radost. And then they ran there, whoever was ready and quickest. On tha thider urnun swa welch swa thon jarwart on radost. Und hier se adeling je welcome veuch on veuch je bad. Und hier nani hit I thijan node. Und hi simle veucht en de waren, of hi alle lagen, buton anum britischem jísle, on se swede je wunderd was. Und hier se adeling je welcome veuch on veuch je bad. Und here we have to kind of draw a line. Here je welcome. Se adeling is so that je Cyneheard. Cyneheard je bad. Veuch on veuch. That is money and life. Gold and life. Veuch on veuch. Je bad. He promised. Cyneheard je bad. Je welcome here, each one of them. Veuch on veuch. Und hier se adeling je welcome. Veuch on veuch je bad. Und hier nani hiti thijan nolde. And none of them, und hier nani, hiti thijan nolde, none of them would accept this kind of deal. Und hier nani hiti thijan nolde. Ach, he simle veucht en de waren, but they were constantly fighting. Ach, he simle veucht en de waren, oath he alle lagen, until they all lay dead, that is. Oath he alle lagen, buton, except, buton anum britischem jísle, except for one Welsh hostage is the best word. A jísle is, in Latin, it's an obses. It's not really a hostage. It's in Game of Thrones, what's his name? Theon is a Yezel. That is, it's someone who is sent to another court to kind of be a token of goodwill, but they are actually raised in that court as like an adopted son or daughter of the king. Walter of Aquitaine is also a Yezel in the Waltharius. But yeah, so there's a Welsh Yezel here, a Welsh kind of like hostage of sorts, but he would have been actually part of the court. And as we can see, he died. He was suide wounded. He was very severely wounded in defending the honor of the dead king. So he obviously felt some sort of kind of like loyalty to the king. Good. Und hier is de atheling je welcome veug on veur je bad. Und hier nani hit je thijan nolde, ac hi simle veug den de waren, oath hi alle lagen. Boot on anum Britishum Yisle, on say swede je wounded was. He was very wounded. Say swede je wounded was. Tha, on morgenne, je huurden that das Kyningesteinas, they him beaften waren, that the king of Slayen was. Tha on morgenne, then in the morning, that is tomorrow. That is, so both next day, tomorrow morning. Tha on morgenne, je huurden that das Kyningesteinas, the king's thanes heard that. They him beaften waren, that were, I guess, following him would be the best way to translate this. It appears that not all of them had arrived in Merton when this happened, so some of them were still on the road. Tha on morgen je huurden dat das Kyningesteinas they him beaften waren, that the king of Slayen was. They found out that the king was slain, that he was dead. That the king of Slayen was. Tha ridon he thider, und his alderman Osrich on Weverth his steen, on tha men they have aften him lavde on thon atheling on thar reburi meton, thar se kuning of Slayen lai, on tha gatu him to beloken havdon, on tha thar to eldon. Okay. Thar ridon he thither, then they rode there. Und his alderman Osrich on Weverth his steen, that is thas kuninges alderman, on thas kuningesteen, Osrich on Weverth, on thamen te he beaften him lavde so the men that he left behind him before. Und thona adeling on thare buri meton, they met the nobleman in that buri is like town. Thona adeling isoliche Cyneheard. Tha meton Cyneheard on he meton Cyneheard on thare buri. There's the king of Slayenai, where the king was laying dead. There's the king of Slayenai. On Thagatu, him belokken havdon. They had locked the gates to them. So here we can imagine Cyneheard, who is severely wounded, and his men have now kind of secured the town of Merton. They've locked the gates, and the rest of the king's men are arriving now from the road. On Thagatu him to belokken havdon. On tha tharto eudon, that is Osrich on Weverth on thamen, they have haften him at lader, tharto eudon. They went there. Tharto eudon. On tha je bad he him here agene dom veus on Londes, if he him thas reaches udon. On him kithon that here mayas him mid warun tha they him from Noldon. Okay. Tha je bad. Eft, that is, again, tha je bad Cyneheard, him, here agen dom veus on Londes. So, tha je bad, then he promised, him, to them, here agen dom, on their own judgment, that is, basically, whatever they wanted, veus on Londes, of money and land. Tha je bad he him, here agen dom veus on Londes. Then he promised them of whatever they wanted of money and land. If he him thas reaches udon, if they to him granted the kingdom, thas reaches, if they allowed it to him. That is Cyneheard will kuning bauen. Cyneheard wants to be king. And he bad him hire agene dom feus on Londes, if he him thas reaches udon, Yavon. And him Kython, that is, he let them know that hire Maias, of Maras, hire Maras, Maras, hire Maras, him midwarun, that their kin, Maras, that their brothers, cousins, Maras, him midwarun, were with him. Tha from him Noldon, um, which did not want to leave him. From him Noldon. They did not want to go from him. So essentially what we're learning here is that some of the men, specifically maybe Osrich and Wivert, have kinsmen on the other side. That is, maybe brothers, maybe cousins. You can imagine the men of Cyneheard are standing on the wall, and Cyneheard is saying, I will give you whatever you want, money or land, if you let me be king, acknowledge that I am the king. And I should let you know as well that many of your brothers and cousins are on this wall with me, and they are not going to leave me. Thayabad he him hira agen nedom feus on Londes, if he him thas regis udon, and him Kython, that hira magas him midwarun, tha the from him noldon, on tha quadon he, that him nani mai leuvranare thon hir hlavord. On tha quadon he, then they said, that him nani mai leuvranare, that there was no kinsman more dear to them, thon hir hlavord, than their lord. Tha quadon he, that him nani mai leuvranare thon hir hlavord. Then they said that there was no kinsman more dear to them than their lord. And he navre his bonon folgian noldon, and they would never follow his slayer. And he navre his bonon, his slayer, folgian follow noldon, did not want to, would not. Tha quadon he, that him nani mai leuvranare thon hir hlavord, and he navre his bonon folgian noldon. On tha budon he hir magum, that he is sunde from eudon, and he quadon that ilche hire je ferum je bodon waren, they mid tham kuninge waren. Okay, on tha budon he, then they kind of requested, they asked, they prayed to their hire magum, their kinsman. Tha budon he hire magum, that he yesunde from eudon, that they would leave Yasunde healthy, unwounded, unkilled. Tha budon he hiramagum, that he Yasunde from Eudon. And this is the people that are on the floor. So you have the initial address from the men on the walls, and this is the response of the men that are challenging them at the gates. They're saying that no one is more dear to them than their dead king. They would never follow the slayer of their dead king. And now, Thabudon hi hiramagum, they're making the same request to their own kinsmen, that he Yasunde from Eudon, that they leave without fighting. Yasunde, that is healthy. That he Yasunde from Eudon, and he quadon that ilche hira jeferum jeboden waren, they mid tham kuninge waren. And he quadon, they said, that ilche hira jeferum, that the same thing to their comrades, jeboden waren, they mid tham kuninge waren. So this is a response from the men on the walls, saying that you are saying the same things that we just said to the men of the king's guard when they were still with him. That ilche, the same, hirieferum jeboden waren, to their comrades was announced. They mid tham kuninge waren, they that were earlier with the king. Good. On tha budon he hiremarum, that he Yasunde from Eudon, and he quadon that ilche hirie ferum jeboden waren, they mid tham kuninge waren. Tha quadon he, that he thas ne on munden, thon ma the eure jeferan the mid tham kuninge of slayene waren. Tha quadon he, then they said, that he thas ne on munden, that they would not care about that. Tha quaron he that he thas ne on munden, thon ma, any more, the more, thon ma the then, thon ma the eure je ferran the midam kunninge of slayene waren. The more, any more than your comrades that were killed with with the king. So essentially, they're saying here, we made the same request to the men of the king before we killed them, and we are not going to pay any heed to that request any more than the men that were with the king did before we killed them. Tha quaron he that he thas ne on munden, that they wouldn't care about that. He thas ne on munden, thon ma the eure je ferran, any more than your comrades, thon ma the eure je ferran, the mid tham kunninge of slayene waren, that were killed with the king. Und he tha, im tha gatu, veuchten de waren, oath that he tharine voegen, on van adeling of slogan, on tha men the him mid waren, alle boot on anum, se was das aldermonnes godsunu, und he his veruch generre, und thach he was ofti wundod. He thought im tha gatu veuchten de waren. They were then fighting, veuchten de, im tha gatu, around the gates. Tha he im tha gatu veuchten de waren, oath that he tharinne voegen, until they burst inside. Oath that he tharinne voegen, on van adeling of slogen, and they killed the nobleman. Voegen, yeah, until they entered. Oath that he tharinne voegen, on van adeling of slogen, that is Cyneheard. So they killed Cyneheard. They burst inside. They were fighting around the gates. They burst inside. They killed Cyneheard. Van adeling of slogan, on tha men they made him waren, and the men that were with him. Alle boot on anum, everyone except for one. Alle boot on anum, say was das aldermonnes godsonu. He was the alderman's godson. Probably Osrich's godsonu. That's probably the alderman that we're talking about here. Say was das aldermonnes godsonu, und he his veruch generre, and he saved his life. Presumably he accepted some sort of surrender. Und he his veruch generre, on thach he was ofti wounded. However, he was still very wounded. So he didn't surrender without a fight, so to speak. Good. Und he tha im tha gatu veuchten de waren, oath that he tharinne voegen, on van adeling of slogen, on tha men te mit him waren, alle boot on anum, se was das aldermonnes godsunu, and he his veruch generre, on thach he was ofti wounded. Und Cynewulf riech so de anon thriti wintra, on his liege leith at Wintanchastre, on das adelinges at Ascanminster, on hire richt ferrin kin gath to cerdice. Okay, so Cynewulf riech so de anon thriti wintra. This is kind of like they're wrapping it up, because this is essentially the life and death of King Cynewulf. He riech so de anon thriti wintra swa we radon. On his leech, his body, Leith lies at Winchester, On Thas Adelings, that is Cyneheard's, so Cyneheard's body, Leith at Ascanminster. And on here Richtverkin gath to Cerdice. So their kind of lineage goes to Cerdic, or Cerdic. I'm not really sure how that's pronounced in modern English. And then I'm not going to read through this, and my head is probably covering the bottom. But this is just kind of a fun little curiosity. It's like a lineage that goes all the way back to Woden. The way it works is if you want to read it yourself, is that it has the name of a king, say Offa was Thingeferding, and that translates to Offa was the son of Thingeferd. And as you can see, Thingeferd Anwulving. So Thingeferd was the son of Anwulf. And then it goes on and on and on and on until we get to Woden. It's a fictional family tree that they make to be more legitimate as kings, but it's pretty cool to see. Most of these names are probably real people, some sort of way. Okay, that's Cynewulf and Cyneheard. Again, this link will be in the comments, and I really can't recommend enough going through and trying to read it yourself without any sort of commentary and seeing how much you understand. If you like this text, if you found this interesting, bookmark it, reread it as much as you can. That's how you build, you know, fluency in a language. Great. Nothing else to say. Until next time, Farah ye Isunde.